In November 1878, in the northern Montana Territory, most frontier trappers were busy strengthening their log cabins with additional chinking and gathering firewood for the harsh winter approaching. However, an elderly hunter named Absalom Winters was engaged in an activity that seemed utterly illogical to all observers. Rather than constructing upwards, he was excavating downwards. His neighbors believed he had gone insane. It was common knowledge that surviving a Montana winter required robust walls, a large fireplace, and vast quantities of firewood. Nevertheless, Winters, a lone man in his 60s, was digging into a hillside much like a burrowing creature. He employed techniques that appeared more suitable for a root cellar than a residence. These doubters were unaware that Absalom Winters possessed knowledge of thermal physics that the majority of frontier constructors had entirely overlooked. This knowledge was so potent that it would ensure his comfort even in temperatures severe enough to kill farm animals and solidify whiskey within its container. Prior to disclosing his precise understanding, I request that you perform a small action. Please click the subscribe button immediately. On this channel, we are rediscovering forgotten survival knowledge that could genuinely preserve your life should contemporary infrastructure ever collapse. Each video presents strategies that proved effective when the alternative was demise. By subscribing, I assure you that you will acquire techniques unfamiliar to most survivalists and off-grid enthusiasts. Additionally, please leave a comment indicating your viewing location and your most extreme winter encounter. Let us now explore the forgotten wisdom possessed by this veteran hunter. Absalom Winters came to the Montana Territory in 1876, arriving as the fur trade boom was nearing its conclusion. In contrast to the younger trappers who constructed their dwellings in valleys close to water, Winters selected a south-facing incline located 3 miles upstream on Tenderfoot Creek, a spot known for its strongest winds and deepest snowdrifts. His initial undertaking perplexed all who witnessed it. Rather than cutting down trees for a conventional cabin, he commenced digging straight into the hillside, extracting roughly cubic feet of soil and clay across a 3-week period. The Metis trappers in the vicinity, observing from afar, expressed their disapproval. Even the Blackfeet families, who occasionally bartered at the nearby trading post, found his method peculiar. Despite their silence, by the end of October, Winters had fashioned a structure resembling a cave, complete with a partial front barrier. The edifice extended approximately 12 feet in depth, 10 feet in width, and reached a maximum height of 7 feet. Its front wall, the sole section entirely above the surface, measured only 4 feet tall and was built from river stones cemented with a mixture of clay and prairie grass. "He's constructing a burial chamber, not a residence," commented Dutch Henry, a seasoned Montana builder credited with erecting more than 40 cabins in the region. Dutch had visited in early November, tendering counsel that Winters courteously disregarded. "That excavation will become saturated with frigid air, much like a bucket fills with water. He will succumb to the cold before Christmas." The disapproval grew stronger when Winters implemented his heating apparatus rather than a substantial stone fireplace. Instead of the large fireplace found in every practical cabin, he constructed a compact firebox, measuring scarcely 18 inches in width. Its placement was not central within the area, but rather shifted to the left, merely 14 inches from the back earth wall. The flue, fashioned from precisely fitted stones, ascended the inner rear wall before emerging through the ground overhead. "Utter folly," declared Dutch Henry. "That small stove is incapable of warming even a chicken coop, and he situated it where all the warmth will simply dissipate into the soil. The fellow is an idiot." What none of them grasped was that Absalom Winters had acquired his method 3 decades prior, not in Montana, but within the copper mines of Michigan's Upper Peninsula. There, Finnish newcomers had demonstrated how their forebears endured winters even more severe than those in Montana, and he had observed comparable principles during a challenging winter spent alongside a Cree family in Saskatchewan, where subterranean lodges provided warmth for families while above-ground homes turned into fatal hazards. However, Winters refrained from debating. He merely proceeded meticulously, adjusting the angle of his firebox, choosing particular stone varieties for thermal retention, and upholding an enigmatic self-assurance that others mistook for old age. The true trial was imminent. It would reveal who genuinely comprehended heat and who only presumed to. The intricate design of Winter's dwelling displayed an advanced nature, despite its rudimentary look. Each decision he took went against common frontier knowledge, but everyone served a specific heat-related function. The 12-foot excavation depth was not random. Within Montana's clay at that level, the ground consistently held a temperature of roughly 45 to 50 degrees Fahrenheit throughout the year, irrespective of external conditions. Although this might appear chilly, it was significantly warmer than the negative 30-degree air that would hit the region in January. Winters had successfully enveloped 3 walls of his abode with an insulating layer that consistently stayed above freezing. The front wall's reduced height fulfilled a dual function. Primarily, it lessened the area vulnerable to frigid gusts. Secondly, by maintaining the wall's elevation at merely 4 feet and having the roof descend from 7 feet at the back to connect with it, Winters fashioned a confined space for warmth. The entire internal capacity measured around 840 cubic feet. This was in contrast to the 1,400 to 1,600 cubic feet found in a typical 12 by 14-foot cabin. However, the genuinely ingenious component was his heat storage system. Beyond that compact firebox, Winters had placed more than 2,800 pounds of meticulously chosen sandstone. He avoided limestone, prone to fracturing from heat stress, and river rocks, which frequently hold water that can burst when heated. Sandstone, recognized for its excellent ability to retain heat and maintain structural integrity through temperature fluctuations. These rocks reached 18 inches into the back earthen wall and protruded 8 inches into the dwelling area. The firebox itself was lined with fire brick sourced 60 miles from Helena, forming a burning chamber capable of reaching temperatures above 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit. Although the exterior stone surface stayed cool enough to touch, the chimney's construction showed comparable exactness. Rather than a direct vertical flue, Winters had engineered a winding route through the stone material. He compelled the hot gases to traverse almost 6 feet through the heat-absorbing mass prior to their escape. This process drew out roughly 73% of the heat from the smoke, in contrast to the 20 to 30% recovered by a conventional straight chimney. That device will inundate his dwelling with smoke, foretold Samuel Grant, a bricklayer experienced in constructing fireplaces throughout 3 regions. Grant inspected the blueprint in late November and declared it inherently defective. The airflow will never draw correctly with so many bends. He'll die from lack of air before succumbing to the cold. What Grant failed to grasp was that Winters had meticulously computed his chimney's cross-sectional area to be 28 square inches, a bit larger than needed for the firebox's capacity, generating sufficient draft pressure to readily conquer the winding path's resistance while optimizing heat exchange. The flooring unveiled an additional level of ingenuity. Winters had spread an 8-inch layer of dry sand covered with closely fitted flat river stones. This formed a heat-retaining layer below the floor and stopped moisture from rising from the ground underneath. Along the edge, he had dug a shallow, draining trench that directed water to a rock-filled pit, controlling any groundwater infiltration. Even his entrance demonstrated meticulous planning, fashioned from 2 strata of split timber with prairie grass serving as insulation in between. It was suspended by leather hinges and sealed tightly against a stone framework. Featuring a clay and fiber seal, its overall thickness measured 4.5 inches. In contrast to the standard 2-inch plank doors found on ordinary cabins, by December 1st, when the initial severe cold enveloped the region, Absalom Winters had fashioned what seemed like a rudimentary excavation. Actually, he had expertly designed a thermal accumulator able to retain warmth for prolonged durations and sustain comfortable temperatures using very little fuel. Dutch Henry, passing by on December 3rd as the temperature fell to 8 degrees, observed smoke curling from the hillside chimney and expressed his disapproval. "That pathetic old man. I wager he won't last 2 weeks before we discover him completely frozen." The supposedly foolish man within his refuge was seated at ease in his shirt sleeves, observing his modest fire gradually imbue thousands of pounds of rock with warmth destined to emanate throughout the night. December 18th, 1878, commenced with an unsettling calm over the northern Montana region. At daybreak, the thermometer showed 14 degrees above zero, yet seasoned frontiersmen identified the indicators: a yellowish hue in the northwestern sky, completely still air, and a decrease in pressure causing ears to pop and old injuries to throb. By midday, the tempest struck what the Blackfeet referred to as a white death, and what weather data would subsequently categorize as a major Arctic event. It swept over the region with fierce power. Gusts surpassed 40 miles per hour, propelling snow sideways and generating an environment where a person could perish from the cold. Situated between his dwelling and his timber storage in the valley community close to Tenderfoot Creek, households gathered closely around enormous rock hearths, continuously adding timber to blazing infernos. Dutch Henry's sizable dwelling, regarded as among the best in the area, used up almost half a cord of timber within the initial day. Merely to keep a comfortable 55 degrees near the fireplace, the distant sections of the dwelling, even though they were just 12 feet from the flames, had fallen to almost freezing by December 20th. The mercury had dropped sharply to 18 degrees Fahrenheit below freezing. The gales showed no sign of easing. Multiple households joined together. Dwellings pooled resources, sharing hearths and warmth to endure as timber usage grew concerning. Dutch Henry estimated he was consuming 4 times his usual amount. Everyday provision located higher up on the slope, discernible merely as a gentle rise. Featuring a stone chimney emitting smoke, Absalom Winter's refuge endured the identical harsh circumstances. Samuel Grant, the bricklayer, who foresaw suffocation from smoke, undertook a perilous journey to Winter's dwelling. On December 21st, truly worried that the elderly man could have passed away. Forging a path through snowdrifts reaching his hips, Grant subsequently recounted his discovery, expressing a mix of bewilderment and incredulity. Before we proceed with Grant's findings, I urge you to press the like button and subscribe if you haven't done so yet. This represents precisely the type of essential survival information that might preserve your life should a power grid failure occur. Please share in the comments the most frigid winter you've ever encountered. Let's ensure this valuable insight endures. Shifting back to the icy Montana slope, Grant made his way toward the refuge. Grant anticipated discovering either a deceased individual or a man frantically burning furnishings for warmth. However, he instead encountered Absalom Winters, casually dressed in his shirt sleeves. Winters was serenely cooking a meal on a compact surface connected to his firebox, and the internal temperature, as Grant subsequently noted in correspondence to his sibling, reached an astonishing 68 degrees Fahrenheit. Within the firebox, a flame scarcely bigger than a cooking fire burned, utilizing possibly 1/8 the timber of a typical cabin hearth, yet the whole area emitted a pleasant warmth. Grant pressed his hand against the substantial stone structure behind the firebox and quickly withdrew it, startled by the intense heat. Having been heated by days of efficient burning, the stones were emitting accumulated thermal energy throughout the dwelling. Even more impressively, Winters proved that the temperature decreased by only 6 degrees, reaching 62 degrees over a 6-hour span after the fire was allowed to extinguish entirely. Such was the significant thermal mass and the excellent insulation offered by the surrounding earth that the refuge functioned akin to an enormous storage heater. "How much fuel have you consumed since the onset of the storm?" Grant inquired, striving to grasp the phenomenon unfolding before him. Winters indicated a tidy pile in the room's corner. "That amount covers 3 days," he explained. "Perhaps 4 pieces of wood daily for warmth with a few extra for preparing meals. Roughly 1/8 of what Dutch consumes in his impressive dwelling, I'd estimate," Winters remarked. Grant mentally performed the calculations. With the external temperature at 18 degrees below zero and continuous wind, Winters managed to sustain a 70-degree temperature difference while utilizing approximately 12% of the required fuel. A typical cabin would have demanded far more. It appeared unbelievable, yet he was directly observing the evidence. The severe weather persisted for an additional 8 days. This represented one of the most prolonged periods of intense cold ever recorded in the territory. Upon its eventual conclusion on December 29th, the community carried out an unofficial assessment. Dutch Henry's dwelling had used more than 4 complete cords of timber. Other households indicated comparable or even greater usage. A number of them had almost exhausted their entire winter provisions within just 1 week. Absalom Winters had consumed a total of roughly 60 pounds of timber. The winter season spanning 1878 to 79 evolved into a prolonged thermal investigation, with Absalom Winters' refuge functioning as the benchmark against typical frontier building methods. The resulting data proved so persuasive that it would shape construction techniques across the northern regions for the subsequent 2 decades. Samuel Grant transitioned from a doubter to an intrigued spectator, commencing the systematic recording of comparative measurements with the meticulous accuracy of a skilled stonemason. Employing a mercury thermometer acquired from his physician brother residing in St. Louis, Grant meticulously logged temperatures at Winter's dwelling, Dutch Henry's residence, and 2 additional typical structures during January and February of 1879. The findings unveiled trends that contradicted all previous assumptions held by frontier constructors regarding thermal effectiveness. In times of mild cold, specifically between 0 and 20 degrees Fahrenheit, Winters consistently kept internal temperatures ranging from 65 to 70 degrees, all while burning an average of 4.2 pounds of cured pine each day. Dutch Henry's dwelling, featuring its substantial stone hearth and traditional layout, necessitated 32 pounds of comparable timber to sustain temperatures between 58 and 62 degrees. Furthermore, this warmth was confined solely to the vicinity of the fireplace. Distant sections frequently recorded temperatures in the lower 40-degree range. The disparity in thermal effectiveness proved astonishing. Winters attained a higher level of comfort by utilizing merely 13% of the fuel. However, the most striking divergence became evident during periods of intense cold. By January 27, 1879, the mercury had plunged to 26 degrees below zero, accompanied by continuous winds gusting at 25 miles per hour. These conditions were sufficiently harsh that 3 inhabitants in remote regions succumbed to the elements. Moreover, animal fatalities throughout the region surpassed 200 individuals. Grant documented that Dutch Henry's residence, even while consuming timber at an exceptionally rapid pace, was unable to sustain a temperature exceeding 55 degrees in the vicinity of its hearth. The substantial internal space of the cabin, coupled with its 6-foot-high walls, presented a heating problem that even copious amounts of wood couldn't resolve. Warm air accumulated ineffectually near the roof, while temperatures at floor level plummeted to below 40 degrees. Dutch calculated that he consumed 85 pounds of timber that particular day at Winter's dwelling. The internal temperature remained constant at 66 degrees, with only 6 pounds of wood being used. The impact of thermal mass grew progressively clearer as the cold season advanced. Grant recorded that Winter's stone heat reservoir, after being completely charged by early January, sustained what he termed a foundational warmth, even when no fires were lit for periods extending to 8 hours. The heat-retaining stones, having absorbed warmth over several days of modest fires, slowly emitted it via radiation to the ground, walls, and ceiling. Their temperature settled consistently between 45 and 50 degrees, thereby averting the heat dissipation issues common in structures built above ground. Data on heat preservation revealed a similarly persuasive narrative. Within a typical cabin, once the fire extinguished, internal temperatures decreased by roughly 12 to 15 degrees hourly, matching the external ambient temperature within 4 to 6 hours. At Winter's refuge, the temperature decrease averaged 2 degrees per hour, eventually stabilizing at approximately 52 degrees, never falling beneath the Earth's consistent temperature. Consequently, Winters was able to ignite a single fire in the evening, allow it to reduce to embers overnight, and awaken to a dwelling still comfortably exceeding 60 degrees. Dutch Henry was compelled to rise twice each night to replenish his fireplace, or else endure freezing mornings. The amount of wood consumed throughout the entire winter offered the starkest contrast. Between November 1878 and March 1879, Grant calculated that Dutch Henry used about 12 cords of wood, which equates to roughly 960 cubic feet of cured lumber. Other standard cabins documented comparable or greater usage. Absalom Winters utilized 1 cord plus an additional 40 cubic feet, amounting to approximately 168 cubic feet in total, which is 17% of what was typically needed. Furthermore, the radiant heat distribution demonstrated superiority within conventional cabins. Warmth gathered intensely close to the hearth, resulting in uncomfortable areas of excessive heat and chilly corners. Winter's thermal mass, however, emitted heat uniformly from the entire back wall, establishing consistent warmth across the confined area. Grant observed that a person could be seated anywhere within the refuge and experience consistent comfort, unlike in his personal residence where he had to decide between being overheated by the fire or chilled in a corner. By the end of February, as news disseminated across the region, additional measurements started to come in. Jonas Webb, a trapper who had constructed an analogous earth shelter following Winter's concepts close to the Judith River, documented similar outcomes. Internal temperatures remained in the mid-60s during a sudden cold spell that proved fatal to his neighbor's horse. Employing what he judged to be less timber than he had previously consumed solely for culinary purposes, the observational data was undeniable. Winter's dwelling, built using techniques disregarded as rudimentary and unwise, surpassed standard frontier constructions by 6 to 8 times in terms of fuel economy, all while providing enhanced comfort. The scientific principles were beyond dispute. Thermal mass, insulation from the earth, a smaller volume, and deliberate heat retention had established a system that operated in harmony with natural laws instead of opposing them. The query that perplexed Samuel Grant and others who had observed Winter's shelter's effectiveness was straightforward. From whom had this veteran hunter acquired such advanced thermal design knowledge? The solution slowly became apparent during discussions held around Winter's compact firebox throughout the extended evenings of the late winter season. The seasoned hunter disclosed that it wasn't a singular origin, but rather a fusion of various traditional knowledge frameworks, which the industrial frontier society had either disregarded or lost memory of. Absalom Winter's birth occurred in 1814 in the northern part of New York State. He was the offspring of a farmer who practiced subsistence agriculture. When he was 19, he journeyed to Michigan's Upper Peninsula amidst the surge in copper mining. He labored beneath the surface, encountering Finnish migrants who had imported building expertise from Scandinavia. These subterranean workers recounted tales of earth dwellings their ancestors had constructed in the severe northern territories. These constructions demanded very little fuel, even through periods of prolonged darkness and intense cold. The fundamental concept was straightforward. Build downwards, not upwards, and utilize the ground for insulation. They constructed small, heat-retaining stone structures, not air-filled ones. They would mock the American miners. Winters were frigid, yet Americans built large wooden houses above ground, consuming entire forests to maintain warmth. The Finns constructed dwellings low to the ground, often excavating into hillsides when feasible, and remained cozy using what Americans would deem minimal resources. In the severe winter of 1843, when a lack of fuel led to fatalities in mining settlements, Winters found refuge with a Finnish household in their partially subterranean residence. Winters personally observed how a dwelling with 2/3 of its structure beneath the ground sustained comfortable temperatures throughout a 3-week period of intense cold that brought the area to a standstill. Nevertheless, the expertise of the Finns represented just one component of the overall solution. By 1852, Winters had journeyed northward into the territory now known as Saskatchewan, engaging in trapping and commerce with various Cree communities. During his time there, he observed winter lodges that incorporated earth mounding and advanced methods of thermal regulation. Over innumerable generations, the Cree people had perfected methods for constructing warm dwellings in one of North America's most severe environments. Employing very little fuel and few resources, they would build a small fire pit, warm stones throughout the day, then cover the embers, allowing the heated stones to emit warmth all night. Winters elaborated that the lodge's construction retained warmth at ground level, where inhabitants resided, preventing its wasteful ascent. They grasped the principle of warming thermal mass rather than merely heating air. Furthermore, these communities educated him on choosing materials, identifying stones that best retained heat, those prone to cracking, and how to achieve a chimney's draft without needing enormous constructions. The optimal placement of a fire for peak efficiency was knowledge honed over hundreds of generations, born out of the imperative for survival. Winters passed that winter living intimately with families who managed to sustain pleasant indoor conditions, even as outside temperatures routinely plunged below -40 degrees. Employing fires that a typical European settler would deem insufficient even for culinary purposes, the insight gained was significant. The scale of a fire or the quantity of materials consumed did not equate to warmth. Rather, a grasp of thermal dynamics provided it. Upon his arrival in Montana, Winters identified the identical wasteful construction habits he had previously observed in Michigan. Expansive above-ground buildings, enormous hearths, prodigious timber usage, and households that struggled to keep warm despite their endeavors. This approach was founded on sheer power, not on informed comprehension. I observed Dutch Henry constructing his cabin, Winters recounted to Grant, acknowledging its superior artistry. Though it featured robust logs and exquisite stonework on the fireplace, he constructed it as if for an Ohio residence, not a Montana refuge. Winter's warmth ascended and escaped. The walls were slender against the wind, and a vast, cold interior volume required heating. He was contending against the winter elements rather than collaborating with the natural environment. This insight disquieted Grant. Grant himself had erected numerous buildings employing standard construction techniques, never once considering if superior methods existed. The notion that the wisdom of immigrants and the practices of indigenous peoples could surpass American frontier building approaches challenged every tenet his upbringing had instilled in him. "Are you suggesting," Grant inquired with caution, "that the native peoples and those from other lands possessed a greater understanding of construction than we do?" Winters stirred a modest fire, placing a solitary piece of wood into it. "My point is that individuals who have endured in severe environments for many generations typically discover effective solutions, whereas those arriving with preconceived notions from less extreme regions often experience undue hardship." By March of 1879, with winter's hold at last loosening on the Montana Territory, a modest yet expanding contingent of constructors and trappers confronted an unsettling truth. Methods they had previously scorned as rudimentary, antiquated, or uncivilized were proving unequivocally superior to their established practices. The evolution of American frontier building had, in some manner, veered away from energy efficiency and towards decorative innovation and nationalistic sentiment. The strategy of earth sheltering, the concepts of thermal mass, and the design for compact heat preservation were far from novel. These principles had been validated across diverse cultures and throughout many centuries. They had merely slipped from memory, or more precisely, were intentionally disregarded by a society that equated progress solely with European and American techniques. Absalom Winters had not conceived of any new inventions. He had merely recalled knowledge that others had opted to discard, and that recollection had ensured his survival and comfort. As established practices led to freezing conditions and extensive deforestation, the spring of 1879 delivered more than just melting earth. It ushered in a subtle yet profound transformation in frontier construction methods across the Montana Territory. This shift disseminated throughout the interconnected community of trappers, miners, and settlers who had endured one of the most severe winters ever documented. Samuel Grant emerged as the initial proponent in April. Once the soil became pliable enough for digging, he commenced building a new dwelling, located 3 miles to the west of his traditional cabin. This design drew extensively from Winters' concepts: a site on a south-facing slope, an excavation reaching 11 feet deep, an interior space of roughly 780 cubic feet, and a heating system based on thermal mass, employing 2,400 pounds of chosen sandstone. Grant painstakingly recorded his building method, potentially producing the inaugural technical guide for frontier earth-sheltered homes. His detailed notes, safeguarded within the Montana Historical Society archives, contain exact dimensions. The specifications for materials and forecasts for thermal efficiency were derived from Winters' proven outcomes. Grant's dwelling was finished by October of 1879. The subsequent winter offered instant confirmation. In late December, amidst a harsh cold spell where outside temperatures plummeted to 22 degrees below zero, Grant noted indoor temperatures of 67 degrees. Roughly 5 pounds of wood were used by him each day. His previous cabin, kept for comparative purposes, would have demanded 40 to 50 pounds for less effective heating. Information spread via the unofficial channels linking frontier settlements. Olaf Bergstrom, a Norwegian trapper operating in the waterways north of Fort Benton, learned of Winters' design from a Midas merchant in February of 1880. Before summer arrived, Bergstrom had built an earth-sheltered winter encampment, integrating both Winters' concepts and features from Norwegian turf house architecture he recalled from his youth. Bergstrom's novel contribution involved expanding the thermal mass idea by installing an elevated sleeping area directly over a stone heat reservoir. This platform, situated 4 feet above the ground and constructed from split timber, enabled him to rest in the warmest area, as the underlying stone mass emitted warmth upwards all night long. He stated that he slept soundly without covers, even when outside temperatures fell below freezing. Its spread intensified during the winter of 1880–81. Dutch Henry, who had initially regarded winters as foolish, discreetly started building what he termed a winter dugout in the autumn of 1880. Despite never openly crediting his inspiration, the structure's design clearly stemmed from Winter's core ideas: excavation into a hillside, a small interior space, a heating system utilizing thermal mass, and insulation provided by earth on 3 sides. Henry's version incorporated several improvements. He devised a compact antechamber that functioned as a cold air barrier, stopping the escape of heated air upon entry or departure. Additionally, he experimented with a 2-part firebox setup, one dedicated to warmth and the other solely for culinary purposes. However, he ultimately discarded the second one, deeming it superfluous due to the main system's effectiveness. By 1882, the Helena Territorial Surveyors Department started documenting earth shelters or dugouts in their archives with growing regularity. A study performed that year located a minimum of 23 such constructions within a 100-mile range of the initial winter dwelling, with probably many more in less accessible regions. These remained undocumented. The design started to develop as various constructors introduced novelties. Friedrich Kohler, a German immigrant, incorporated an advanced ventilation setup, employing a minor secondary shaft to generate mild air movement without substantial heat escape. Thomas Webb, previously a ship's carpenter, integrated curved roof supports that more effectively spread the Earth's weight, while fostering a roomier internal atmosphere. Potentially most importantly, native populations, who had historically applied comparable concepts for their winter dwellings, commenced imparting improvements to settlers who were at last receptive to learning. Many horses, an elder from the Blackfeet tribe, instructed several trappers on the best placement for fireboxes according to various soil compositions, and how to construct efficient moisture seals using rendered animal grease and clay compounds. The financial benefit was considerable. Households that had formerly used 4 to 6 cords of wood each winter, equating to weeks of work or a notable monetary outlay, observed their usage decreasing to 1 cord or below. The hours saved from collecting firewood could then be allocated to other essential survival tasks. Less frequent fire maintenance resulted in improved rest and a diminished chance of fires extinguishing during harsh evenings. Not all individuals embraced this method. A significant cultural opposition persisted among numerous settlers, who considered earth shelters to be unworthy of American frontier living, perceiving them as overly akin to basic native habitations or the sod homes of impoverished pioneers. Certain constructors tried earth shelter designs, but were unsuccessful due to flawed construction, insufficient water drainage, unsuitable rock varieties for heat retention, incorrect flue draft computations, and subsequently attributed the failure to the idea itself instead of their own execution. However, among individuals who prioritized staying alive over aesthetics and who esteemed utility more than societal norms, these concepts gradually gained traction. By 1885, approximately 60 to 70 earth-sheltered winter residences were present solely in northern Montana, with comparable figures emerging in sections of Wyoming, Idaho, and the Dakota Territories, regions characterized by harsh winters and dwindling timber supplies. Absalom Winters, then in his 70s, would sometimes host guests looking for guidance. He imparted his expertise without reservation, requesting only that individuals consider the Earth's provisions before contending with them, while he would construct a modest conventional cabin for summer occupation. He consistently reverted to his subterranean hillside dwelling each October, where he proceeded to pass winters in a degree of coziness that numerous standard residences never attained. This heritage extended beyond mere technical aspects. It signified a wider transformation in the way certain frontier inhabitants conceived construction and endurance. Rather than bringing in methods from less extreme climates and making them function via excessive material usage, They started adjusting to indigenous circumstances, employing tenets validated over many generations by individuals who had genuinely conquered those surroundings. The rudimentary subterranean dwelling of the veteran hunter had ignited a subtle yet profound change in frontier heat management, a development that conserved innumerable quantities of firewood and averted immense hardship throughout harsh winters. It also potentially preserved lives during the most extreme meteorological occurrences. This occurred simply because a single individual was prepared to recall knowledge that others had been too arrogant to acquire. The winter of 1886 ushered in such extreme temperatures that it subsequently became known as the Winter of Death throughout the northern plains. Livestock perished in the hundreds of thousands, thereby bringing an effective close to the period of open-range cattle farming. Standard homesteads rapidly depleted their provisions, which many residents found impossible to restock. Some families completely abandoned their land claims, unable to withstand the relentless cold in their earth-sheltered residences. Dispersed throughout the territory, families navigated the crisis with difficulty, but they survived due to the thermal principles Absalom Winters had demonstrated. The combination of thermal mass, earth insulation, and efficiently heated compact spaces once more demonstrated their efficacy amidst the most severe conceivable circumstances. Samuel Grant recorded the winter's events in his comprehensive diaries. He estimated that his subterranean dwelling consumed 68% less timber than his previous cabin would have needed, all while sustaining a higher level of coziness. Crucially, when severe late winter blizzards rendered foraging unfeasible for extended periods, his heat-retaining system enabled him to extend his fuel reserves in manners that traditional houses could not replicate. The distinction, Grant penned, was not simply about ease or financial savings, but potentially existence itself. If I had remained in my former cabin during the three-day storm in February, he reflected, I would have confronted a dilemma, risking perilous exposure to find firewood or observing my family gradually succumb to the cold. Within the earth-sheltered dwelling, our stored warmth sustained us, leaving us with surplus fuel. The justification was absolute, though it was accompanied by a stark understanding. The fundamental concepts that had preserved lives in 1886 were not recent findings. Rather, they constituted age-old knowledge that European colonists had either disregarded or lost memory of. Instead, they opted to duplicate construction techniques originating from environments that shared scant similarity with the severe continental winters they now encountered. Native populations throughout the Northern Territories, encompassing groups such as the Cree, the Blackfeet, and the Inuit, had, over innumerable generations, devised advanced methods of thermal management. Finnish, Norwegian, and other Scandinavian immigrants brought with them expertise in earth-sheltered construction, inherited from forebears who had endured Arctic environments. Nevertheless, American frontier society had mostly overlooked both these origins, choosing instead to contend with ineffective imported strategies rather than acknowledge the potential superiority of rudimentary or non-native methods. Absalom Winters passed away in the spring of 1889 at the age of 75, within a hillside dwelling he had constructed 11 years prior. He had comfortably endured each winter, utilizing only a small portion of the provisions his neighbors expended. This served as tangible evidence that grasping fundamental physics held greater significance than societal preconceptions or standard customs. His dwelling continued to be operational for an additional 20 years, utilized by successive trappers and miners. Its eventual abandonment around 1910 was not attributable to any structural defect, but rather solely to the decline of the fur trade and the subsequent depopulation of the region. The heat-retaining stones, the earth walls, and the core architectural plan all maintained their integrity after 3 decades. Presently, over 100 years subsequent, proponents of off-grid living and survival specialists are unearthing the identical principles Winters showcased. Contemporary earth-sheltered residences, bermed homes, and subterranean habitations employ the very same thermal physics: heat-absorbing mass for warmth retention, ground insulation for consistent temperatures, condensed spaces for optimal performance, and deliberate passive solar positioning. Modern constructors, employing sophisticated materials and meticulous engineering, routinely attain outcomes that parallel Winters' performance from the 19th century. Heating expenses are cut by 70 to 90% when contrasted with typical above-ground buildings. Furthermore, they offer consistent indoor climates using very little energy, ensuring comfort without relying on extensive resource depletion. The paradox is striking. Despite our era of cutting-edge construction knowledge and complex climate control systems, we are now affirming methods that early pioneers disregarded as unsophisticated and which native populations had refined many centuries prior. We are acquiring, at a slow pace and high cost, insights that were readily accessible to anyone modest enough to pay attention and inquire. The primary takeaway isn't related to building methods. Rather, it concerns the repercussions of cultural hubris and the significance of ancestral wisdom. To label certain practices as rudimentary merely because they originate from groups we perceive as less developed frequently exposes our own lack of understanding rather than theirs. Winters comprehended a truth that the majority of his contemporaries failed to perceive. Truly effective remedies arise from grasping fundamental principles rather than simply adhering to established norms. The ground itself provides a stable temperature and an immense capacity for thermal retention. These represent tangible physical facts, not subjective viewpoints or cultural inclinations. Collaborating with these realities fosters efficiency. Opposing them generates inefficiency. Each winter, while contemporary residences expend vast quantities of energy to sustain warmth, we are rediscovering the insights winters possessed in 1878. The most enduring, effective, and robust housing solutions. Frequently, these are not the most recent or technologically intricate designs. These are the systems that align with inherent natural laws that have perpetually existed, awaiting our recognition. Prior to your departure, I require you to complete 3 actions. Firstly, please press the like button if you appreciated the insights from this overlooked knowledge. Secondly, consider subscribing to this channel, as our mission is to reveal practical survival expertise that proved effective in times when failure was fatal, offering no contemporary trivialities, only verified methods from individuals who lacked any fallback options. Thirdly, leave a comment indicating your viewing location and whether you would contemplate constructing an earth-sheltered dwelling given the information presented today. The information shared in this video is not merely conceptual. It has been confirmed through real-world survival, demonstrated under harsh circumstances, and affirmed by scientific principles. In an era where foundational systems are becoming progressively vulnerable and the expenses of energy persistently climb, the ancient wisdom of the hunter could hold greater significance today than at any previous time. A concluding remark. This material serves an educational and historical purpose. Every construction endeavor necessitates appropriate engineering, adherence to local regulations, and expert advice. The methodologies outlined herein are offered for informational and motivational purposes rather than as practical building instructions. Absalom Winters passed away more than 100 years ago, yet the fundamental concepts he illustrated, such as thermal mass, subterranean insulation, and collaborating with natural systems instead of opposing them, retain their full applicability today, just as they did on that frigid Montana slope in 1878. Occasionally, the most effective way to advance involves reflecting on the past, to the insights we were too arrogant to grasp initially.